They told you to be kind, to be humble, to be agreeable. They didn't say it because it was true. They said it because it made you easier to manage. You were raised to be liked, not to be known. There's a difference. To be liked, you must shrink. To be known, you must reveal. One leads to comfort, the other to confrontation. And from the moment you took your first breath, the world began shaping you. Not into who you are, but into who they needed you to be. So they praised you when you smiled, punished you when you questioned, rewarded obedience, shamed defiance. By the age of 7, most of your truths weren't yours anymore. They belonged to the crowd. You just wore them long enough to forget the difference. This is the first fracture identity as performance. They don't teach you to examine your thoughts. They teach you to align them, to get in line, to wait your turn, to speak when spoken to never upset the balance. And you think that's maturity. But Machiavelli would call it submission. Because here's the thing, no one tells you most of what you believe about yourself isn't from you. Your preferences, your values, even your fears. They were whispered into your skull by the voices of teachers, parents, lovers, enemies, until they sounded like your own. You call it your personality, but it's a survival strategy. A costume tailored over years of unconscious conformity. That smile you wear in awkward silence. That's not joy, that's defense. That job you say you chose, that's not ambition, that's inherited expectation. That relationship you won't leave. That's not love, that's fear of being alone with yourself. So you suffer, but you don't know why, because the lie is convincing. You've worn the mask so long you think it's skin. You defend it, protect it, bleed for it, even when it costs you everything. You think being liked equals being safe. But the people pleaser is always the first to die in war. Because likability is the opposite of clarity. The clearer you become, the more enemies you attract. Because clarity threatens illusion. And most people live inside illusions so fragile, a single honest sentence could collapse their entire identity. So they punish you for clarity. They mock your questions. They call you too intense, too selfish, too cold. Translation, you're getting close to something real, and that scares them. You will never be loved by the masses for knowing yourself. You'll be resented, feared, exiled. But the man who knows himself doesn't need the crowd, because he understands something deeper. Approval is currency, and the self-ignorant will trade anything to earn it. But once you see the exchange rate, you stop playing the game. You stop performing, you stop explaining, you stop apologizing for your sharp edges. Because you realize they aren't flaws, they're weapons. You don't need to dull them to fit into their soft cages. You were born with teeth. So why pretend you weren't meant to bite? Machiavelli would laugh at your humility, not because it's weak, but because it's pretend. False humility is the leash of the domesticated. You don't actually think you're inferior. You were just taught that saying so makes you safer, more lovable, more employable. So you play the game, you lower your voice, you raise your hand, you shrink your opinions. You call it politeness, but it's submission wrapped in manners. And slowly the parts of you that don't fit this script begin to die. The rage, the defiance, the ambition. You kill them yourself thinking you're being good. But Machiavelli knew the truth. Goodness without power is nothing. And power without self-awareness is a weapon in someone else's hand. You don't know yourself. That's why you suffer. Because somewhere along the way, the real you was buried beneath layers of performance. But here's the catch. Every performance requires an audience. And every audience demands a script. So You become a character in a play you didn't write. You recite lines you don't believe. And when the applause fades, you're left with silence. A silence so loud, it shakes you. Because in that silence, you realize you have no idea who you are when no one is watching. That is the pain. Not rejection, not failure, not loneliness, but the quiet horror of looking in the mirror and seeing nothing familiar. You've become a stranger to yourself, and now you crave the very mask that killed you. Because without it, you're no one. But listen closely. No one is the perfect place to start. You wake up. You follow your routine. You call it your life. But Machiavelli would call it obedience. Not the kind enforced by chains or kings. The kind far more dangerous internalized. You obey without a command. You submit without a master. Because someone planted a system inside your mind. And now it runs on autopilot. Your decisions, your fears, your dreams, all designed by forces you no longer recognize. Your parents' silence became your conflict style. Your teacher's disapproval became your internal critic. That childhood rejection became your template for love. And you think you're choosing freely, but most of what you do is repetition. Trauma becomes pattern. Pattern becomes identity, and identity becomes prison. You are not living, you are reenacting. And that's the second fracture obedience through memory. You don't even remember when the leash was put on, only that it's always been there. When you hesitate to speak, it tugs. When you crave something new, it tightens. When you consider leaving, it whispers, "Don't ruin everything." Who taught you to be so loyal to pain? You stay in rooms that suffocate you. You keep peace in conversations that insult you. You fake laughter in circles that drain you. Because at some point you mistook obedience for goodness. They taught you that your value comes from being tolerated, not from being respected. So you became easy to work with, pleasant to be around, unproblematic. And slowly you learn to smile while bleeding. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. You were programmed, yes, but now you must choose. Will you remain loyal to your programming or betray it to become free? Make no mistake, freedom is betrayal. You will have to betray the version of you that kneels, that apologizes, that flinches at disapproval. The version that lowers their voice when the room gets tense. The version that never asks for more than what's offered. You'll have to kill that part and bury it where no one can find it. But first, you must see how deeply it controls you. Look at your choices. The job you hate but keep. The partner who belittles you but you defend. The silence you hold even when the truth is rotting your chest. All signs of invisible obedience. You serve ghosts. Ghosts of your past. Ghosts of cultural myths. Ghosts of rules no one remembers writing. Don't be difficult. Don't talk back. Don't get angry. Don't want too much. Every don't is a bar on your internal prison. But here's the secret. They don't need to lock the door if you never try to leave. And you never do. Because safety is addictive. Even if it kills you slowly. You've confused comfort with peace. But comfort is what they give you when they want you quiet. Comfort is the drug they hand you when they want your silence. The Netflix, the sugar, the validation, the compliments, pacifiers, distractions. So you never look up and ask, who is benefiting from my obedience? Because someone always is. The quiet employee lets the company exploit him. The submissive partner allows abuse to thrive. The agreeable citizen lets corruption rule. Your obedience keeps the system alive, but kills you in the process. You don't speak up because that would mean breaking character. You don't leave because that would mean disappointing someone. And worst of all, you don't change because change would mean accepting that you've wasted years. That's the unspoken fear, isn't it? If I change now, what does that say about the version of me that came before? You protect your suffering because it's familiar. You protect your prison because it has your name on the door. But Machiavelli wouldn't weep for that man. He'd shake his head and whisper, "You obey because it's easy, not because it's right." Let's talk about your morality. You think doing the right thing makes you good. But often, the right thing is just the expected thing. And doing what's expected isn't virtue, it's compliance. Sometimes betrayal is moral. Sometimes silence is cowardice. Sometimes rebellion is holy. But you won't know that if you keep obeying, because obedience blinds you to possibility. It removes alternatives. It narrows vision. So you never ask, what would happen if I said no? No to the role. No to the pressure. No to the identity you were assigned. But you could. You still can. You can say no. And that no might burn bridges. But sometimes the bridge leads straight to hell. Your freedom doesn't begin with yes. It begins with no. No, I won't stay silent. No, I won't pretend to agree. No, I won't keep sacrificing my peace for your comfort. Say no enough times and you'll hear something new. Silence. Not the silence of suppression. The silence of space, of clarity, of power returning. And in that silence, you might finally hear your own voice. Not the obedient echo, the real one, the buried one, the one that says, I was never meant to serve. You say, this is just who I am. But is it, who told you that? Where did you get the idea that your habits, your reactions, your daily script was you believe you're a collection of preferences, quirks, memories, and moods? But those aren't your essence. They're your armor, your camouflage, a costume stitched together by survival and social reward. That's the third fracture, mistaking your mask for your identity. Let's expose it. You call yourself nice. But is that you or the fear of conflict wearing a smile? You call yourself loyal. But is that you or the inability to walk away from the familiar? You call yourself logical. But is that you or the self-soothing voice of someone terrified to feel? You didn't build a self. You assembled a disguise. And now you're trapped inside it. Because every time the real you tried to break through, someone punished it. When you got angry as a child, they said you were difficult. When you cried, they told you to toughen up. When you spoke your mind, they rolled their eyes and said, don't be dramatic. So you learned to swallow, to shrink, to smooth your edges. That was your first kill. Not of someone else, but of the truer version of yourself. And you did it again and again until the mask became muscle memory. Now you live as the edited version, polished, predictable, dead. Machiavelli understood people don't want the truth. They want the version of you that threatens them the least. And so you give it to them. You call it fitting in. You call it being mature. You call it social skills. But in war, no one survives by being liked. They survive by being real, by being aware, by being dangerous when necessary. And that version of you, the dangerous one, you've buried him under layers of self-denial. You say, I don't want power. No, you've just never tasted it. You say, I'm not manipulative. No, you're just too afraid to admit when you are. You've convinced yourself that morality means weakness, that being authentic means being harmless. But you forget a lion is authentic too. And it does not apologize for being lethal. You wear a mask of empathy to avoid rejection. But forced empathy is just self-betrayal in a noble costume. You smile too much. You agree too quickly. You nod when you don't understand. You thank people who offend you. You explain when no one asked. You post your thoughts online, praying for likes, then edit them based on backlash. That's not you. That's your mask, begging to survive. But here's the trap. The longer you wear the mask, the more you forget what's underneath. You start to confuse performance with personality. You start defending your own limitations. You say, that's just how I am. But it's not how you are. It's how you learn to be so they wouldn't leave. You were never born timid. You were made that way. You were never born agreeable. You were trained. You were never born weak. You were made to feel small by people who feared what you could become. And now every time you feel an urge to break the script, to say what you really mean, to leave what no longer serves you, to demand more, your mask pulls you back. Because masks don't like air. They rot when exposed to truth. So it whispers, be quiet, play nice, don't ruin this. But you already know what's ruined. You. Because wearing a mask comes at a cost. Not just in exhaustion, but in disconnection. You don't feel seen because you don't show up. You don't feel respected because you don't take up space. You don't feel loved because you only let people love the version of you that never complains. And now you wonder why you suffer. You suffer because your entire existence is a performance, and somewhere deep in your bones you know it. That aching, that emptiness at the end of the day, that hollow echo in your chest when you're finally alone. That's the real you trapped behind your mask screaming. But here's the terrifying part. If you take the mask off, what's left? You've spent so long being the good one, the quiet one, the polite one that you fear the alternative is chaos. But it's not. It's clarity. You were never meant to be digestible. You were never meant to be safe. You were meant to be known. And to be known is to risk it all, to speak when it's unpopular, to walk when it's inconvenient, to stand when everyone else bows. Machiavelli knew power begins when you stop performing and start becoming. Not becoming what they want, but what you are without permission. Yes, people will leave. Let them. Yes, some will call you selfish. Let them. Yes, the mask will try to crawl back on. Let it scream. Because the version of you that's emerging is not weak. He is dangerous. Not to others. To the system that kept him small. And when the mask finally falls, you'll meet him. The one who never bowed. The one who never begged. The one who watched, waited, and remembered. He is not afraid of the dark. He is not ashamed of his hunger. He is not polite. He is real, and he's been waiting for you to set him free. Machiavelli didn't waste time finding himself. He forged himself. While others searched for meaning, he built it. While others begged to be understood, he became incomprehensible on purpose. Because to be understood is to be predictable. And to be predictable is to be vulnerable. That's the fourth fracture. Believing identity is something you discover. It isn't. It's something you build. The world lied to you. It told you to be yourself. But it never told you which self to be. The angry one. The weak one. The one shaped by trauma, instinct, or habit. No, Machiavelli would scoff at this advice. Be yourself is a death sentence if who you are is unexamined. He didn't trust the self. He shaped it. He engineered it like a fortress with blind spots removed and walls where there were once wounds. Because here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Your default self is not sacred. It is contaminated. Contaminated by need, by shame, by years of unconscious imitation. And until you purge the programmed self, you will never be dangerous, never be respected, never be free. You must treat the self not as a soul, but as a weapon. And a weapon must be forged, not found. So ask yourself, would you take a rusty, half-formed blade into battle? Then why do you take your reactive, emotional, scattered identity into war? You go into conflict with your wounds exposed. You go into love with your desperation leaking out. You go into ambition carrying guilt. And you wonder why you keep losing. You keep using a self that was never meant to win, only to survive. That must end now. Machiavelli would demand a new method. Audit every trait. Is it useful? Or is it sentimental? Question every value. Did you choose it, or were you praised for it? Rehearse every weakness. If you can't control it, someone else will. Weaponize every truth. What you hide, others will use against you. This is not narcissism, it's design. The difference between the weak and the strong. The weak inherit a personality. The strong construct one. And once you understand this, you become lethal. Because now yourself is not just a response, it is a strategy. You don't react to betrayal. You anticipate it. You don't hope for love. You filter for it. You don't search for identity. You define it. When you walk into a room, you don't adjust to the energy. You become the energy that others orbit. Because now your identity is no longer passive. It's tactical. And tactically, the most dangerous identity is this unapologetic. Unapologetic about your standards. Unapologetic about your ambition. Unapologetic about your silence. Unapologetic about how little you explain yourself. You don't owe anyone a backstory. They say you've changed. Of course you have. Only dead things stay the same. You say I'm not who I was. Good. Who you were got you here. But he won't take you further. Old you needed approval. New you needs precision. Old you asked for validation. New you issues commands. Old you suffered quietly. New you watches, calculates, then strikes. You think Machiavelli wanted peace? No. He wanted control. Because peace is an illusion without leverage. You want to feel grounded. Don't meditate. Eliminate chaos. You want confidence. Don't affirm. Stack results. You want clarity. Don't journal. Make decisions. All identity becomes real through repetition. So, the identity you choose must be backed by action. That's how belief becomes blood. They will call it arrogance. But that's only because your certainty exposes their confusion. They will call it cold. But that's only because your boundaries remind them of their neediness. They will say you've changed. Let them. You didn't come here to be palatable. You came here to dominate yourself. Because the man who dominates himself, who rewrites his own code, who reprograms every reaction, who sets fire to the old operating system, becomes untouchable. He doesn't panic when she leaves. Because he was never defined by her presence. He doesn't flinch when betrayed, because he anticipated it 3 moves ago. He doesn't fold when criticized, because he doesn't confuse opinion with truth. He is not hard to read. He is impossible to decipher, because every part of him has been shaped on purpose. His words, his silence, his movements, his exits. He didn't find himself, he designed himself. And now the world responds to him differently, because the world senses when someone is no longer asking for permission. When you wear a mask, people sense weakness. When you wear yourself by design, they sense power. Not loud, not flashy, not emotional, cold, measured, unshakable. That is what you must become, not for revenge, not for attention, for alignment. Because the man who weaponizes identity never suffers silently again. He doesn't beg to be seen. He chooses when to appear. He doesn't try to be loved. He filters for the few who see him clearly. He doesn't live on instinct. He lives by code. And that code cannot be written by culture, by family, by fear. It must be written by you, no one else. And until it is, you will suffer. To end the suffering, you must begin with one act. Kill who you think you are. Not physically, symbolically, psychologically, because who you think you are is the source of the pain. Not because that version is evil, but because it's incomplete, weak, built for a world that no longer exists, built by people who never knew your potential. You didn't invent that version, you inherited it from your childhood fears, from your culture's limitations, from your family's dysfunction. And every time you cling to it, you delay your transformation. This is the final fracture attachment to the false self. You wear it like armor, but it's a cage, and now it's time to burn it. You will grieve. Yes, because the self, even if false, is familiar. And familiarity is comforting until it becomes suffocating. But Machiavelli would not hesitate. He would say, to lead a kingdom, you must first conquer yourself. And conquest requires sacrifice. You must be willing to stand in front of the mirror. Look at the version of yourself you've been protecting and say, you're not coming with me. That part of you that fears rejection, kill it. That part that needs to explain everything, kill it. That part that hides behind humility to avoid conflict, kill it. Because none of those parts are real. They are adaptations, responses, decoys. They got you here, but now they hold you hostage. You say, that's just how I am. And that sentence alone has cost you years. You are not how you are. You are who you decide to become every single day. But you can't evolve while dragging dead weight. You can't ascend while defending your own cage. So burn it. Burn the need to be liked. Burn the desire to fit in. Burn the fear of being misunderstood. The real you will survive the fire. The false you will scream. Let it. It will say, but people won't recognize you anymore. Good. It will say, but you'll be alone. You already are. It will say, but who will love you if you change? Only the right ones. When the old self dies, a strange thing happens. You don't feel fear, you feel space. Space between stimulus and response. Space between reaction and retaliation. Space between desire and decision. And in that space you begin to breathe, no longer suffocating under expectations, no longer addicted to validation, no longer terrified of being misunderstood. Because now you see clearly. You see how much of your life was spent inside a costume. How many of your choices were made from fear? How many of your beliefs were secondhand? You see your scars not as shame, but as proof. Proof that you survived the mask. Proof that the old self served its purpose and now can be buried with honor. You don't hate it. You thank it. Then you let it die. And from the ashes a new force rises, not softer, stronger, not louder, quieter, but colder, not reactive, strategic. Because now you are not being yourself, you are wielding yourself. Your voice becomes a tool, not a cry. Your presence becomes calculated, not habitual. Your emotions become signals, not chains. Machiavelli would call this the final power self-mastery. No more being driven by subconscious ghosts. No more sleepwalking through routines you didn't design. No more performing a personality for people who wouldn't bleed for you. Now every move is deliberate. Every silence is chosen. Every word is a blade. And they'll feel it, the people around you, the watchers. They won't know what changed, but they'll sense it. They'll start speaking carefully. They'll start seeking your approval instead of giving theirs. They'll stop testing your boundaries because power doesn't need to shout. It radiates. When the real you walks into the room, even your silence makes noise. And the suffering gone? No, still there, but different. Now it's not confusion, it's clarity. Not helplessness, it's hunger. Not loneliness, it's solitude. And there's beauty in that. Because the man who walks alone without the mask, without the leash, without the script, doesn't fear the dark anymore. He becomes it. Because he knows the death of the false self is not the end. It's the beginning of all things sharp. Now let it slow. The voices fade. The fire quiets. The masks are gone. You sit in silence, not as a victim, but as the architect of your own rebirth. There is peace and power, but only for the one who earns it. So let the old version of you rest. He served his purpose, but he cannot lead you anymore. Walk forward, not with answers, but with ownership. If you found this story meaningful, please share it with a friend. Comment below and let me know what part of you is ready to die. Subscribe to my channel to discover more dangerous truths.